afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Intelligent Enterprise Digital Lab at IDC Directions. My name is Alexandre Barbosa, and I'm a managing partner at Faber, an early-stage technology VC firm from Lisbon. It is a pleasure to be with you today, and I want to start by thanking IDC for the invitation to host this session. Both 2020's social and business environment and IDC Directions sessions so far offer clear evidence that digital transformation is accelerating across industries. This fact has short-term implications on how the enterprise is adapting to a different reality, but one can expect structural impacts in the medium and long term in different verticals, potentially transforming the business landscape in general. It is difficult, if not impossible, to think about and plan for the future of any industry and without having technology as a foundation, namely applied artificial intelligence, machine learning, or data science. We at Faber Ventures invest in teams who are transforming the world with technology, with a particular focus on emerging B2B enterprise technologies. Our current thesis is that entrepreneurship and data-driven startups are a core engine of future growth and industry transformation. In the last weeks, Sapphire Ventures, a leading US investor both in VC funds and mature tech companies, published their latest CIO Innovation Index involving 100+ enterprise technology decision makers. Key findings include that CIOs are adopting emerging technologies across all categories. Top 3 areas IT leaders are investing in include AI and machine learning, next-generation data management, and cybersecurity. CIOs also find that while startups account for 10% of the IT budget today, that number is expected to grow by 50% in the next 12 months, proving that CIOs are increasingly interested in adopting emerging technologies to help run their businesses during the current environment. Alongside other proof points, these clear findings show how important the new generation of data-driven startups are for the future of technology-powered businesses. To discuss how some emerging solutions are transforming the enterprise, accelerating corporate innovation, and how startups can work with organizations in their transition to intelligent enterprise, we are joined today by 3 Portuguese founders who are among the leading innovators transforming the enterprise. I have the pleasure to welcome Fabiana Clemente, co-founder and Chief Data Officer of Ydata, Jaime Jorge, co-founder and CEO of Codacy, and Vasco Pedro, co-founder and CEO of Unbabel. Fabiana, Jaime, Vasco, thank you for joining us today. We will kick off the session with your presentations and then dedicate some time to jointly discussing the intelligent enterprise from an entrepreneur's point of view. Fabiana, you're joining us remotely, but we'll start with you and your presentation. Welcome and thank you.
Hello, I am Fabiana, Ydata's Chief Data Officer. We are Ydata and we are adopters of AI to become the leaders of tomorrow. We are all aware of the potential of AI. In fact, this potential can be valued in 5.8 billion across different industry sectors. AI has the power to disrupt all markets, and whoever adopts AI first will be the leaders of tomorrow. Did you know that 85% of AI-based projects do not succeed, which leads to 21 billion losses just in 2019? Yes, AI is difficult to adopt, even more and more complex than adopting AI software solutions. The reasons associated with the challenge to develop a successful AI solution from end to end have very different backgrounds. First, the access to quality data is the #1 roadblock. Data scientists spend 80% of their time in tedious and repetitive tasks, which is not that much of a benefit for businesses. After all, data scientists should be all dedicated to developing models, which in the end bring values to the business. Second, security and privacy regulations are also a major block. Data is already hard to get access. With this, it gets even harder. And in the end, data scientists might not even have the data they need. And finally, the massive technical debt that exists in the development of an AI solution. Many are the teams involved in the process of developing these solutions. Teams with very different backgrounds, which ultimately results in miscommunication problems that in the end lead to poor or not existing results. Ydata connects data teams to their prime matter, the data, while helping them to deliver value for their companies. We offer a data-centric platform where data scientists work with high quality and synthetic data, so they can spend more time around models that in the end bring value to the business. And what is the real difference about us? A shift in the paradigm of AI, a vision centered in data while creating AI solutions. After all, high-quality data should be the prerequisite for successful AI and not the other way around. Through unblocking data for teams and automating repetitive tasks, we are helping data scientists to become more efficient and more focused while developing models, which is what in the end brings the value. This will reflect on company costs, as after all the invest time in development of AI will be on the models and not on getting the data. Our collaborative environment that covers the end-to-end life cycle of AI not only reduce the number of teams involved in the process, but also foster faster innovation. Finally, to expose sensitive data is possible, as I will further explain. As I've mentioned before, there's a massive technical depth in the development of AI-based solutions. And a lot of times when jumping into AI, we only focus on the little black box there. What we propose is a platform that covers the end-to-end solutions of AI and all the other boxes there, which are called MLOps. And what makes us unique is the care that we give to the data. We offer a set of tools that automate and enhance the data quality, such as reports, automated preprocessing, and synthetic data. After all, the hardest part of AI is not machine learning, but rather the data. And you might have now a very hard question to be answered. What is synthetic data after all? In the dummy that you can see here in this depicted image, I will make a very dramatic analogy. So imagine that we were using real persons instead of crash dummies to test the development of cars. Well, crash dummies help us to save lives, let's say. After all, they have the exact same capabilities of real persons, meaning weights and height, but they avoid the use of real persons for tests. That happens the same with synthetic data. Synthetic data can be used instead of real data while preserving the capabilities and the same correlations of the real data. It is very useful and can be used to achieve high results while developing AI solutions, but now without privacy concerns. Digging just a bit more onto Ydata's platform functionalities, the creation of new data through data synthesization is a reality and solves a variety of problems from the access to sensitive data to problems in highly imbalanced data sets to solve even problems with bias. We also enable the creation and training of models with no learning curve for data science teams, as you can see in the next slide. After all, we will be using the tools that they are already familiar with. This is possible as we offer a scalable platform that can be deployed either on cloud or on-prem. We provide also scalable data pipelines that is basically the main task of the data science teams. And we provide this in a very easy and simple interface. Finally, as a data-centric platform, data itself is our major concern. We know that bad data does not build good models. And for that reason, as you can see in the next slide, we provide automated data quality reports so data scientists can know what they can expect from the data they are working with. In the next slide, I will summarize all of this and how we help organizations to jump into digital transformation through AI. With a modern data strategy, governance, and data democratization, it is possible to leverage high data quality through synthetic data generation and other tools that ensure this data is in good shape. We also offer a collaborative environment for teams to be more productive and to deliver faster solutions with good time to market. Finally, and by lowering the overall cost of investment of AI, we are making business to become more competitive while adopting AI. Now, a bit of our experience with the industry use cases. In retail, we are more or less familiar with recommendation systems, since Amazon, for example, or even the Netflix recommendation system that we like so much, their success in their unique recommendation systems is undeniable. And retail have adopted machine learning worldwide to step up their business gains. Nevertheless, they are still struggling with their data. After all, bad quality data is causing, for example, to kill a marketing campaign. Also, bad data can damage a brand reputation and in the end, leading to missed opportunities. With good quality data, it is proven that retails can benefit 2 times the ROI that they are expecting from investment in AI. And they are able to do it with Ydata's platform, as retail companies can now give the right tools for data scientists to work with the right data. The next use case that I'm going to share is about insurance companies. Churn models are very familiar in this industry as well, and they are very important for insurance companies, for example. But in order to develop a proper churn model, the access to sensitive data is required, such as age, profession, location, and others. And also, it is not important to forget how imbalanced these data sets can be for the insurance reality. Also, these challenges in the end can lead to bad churn models. That's why having the access to the right data, even if sensitive, or to have it balanced or the proper tools to work the data in a proper way are so important to ensure that insurance companies will have not only better churn models, but also be able to keep their customers. And with the use of Ydata's platform, this is possible, as we offer tools for the correct data preprocessing and also synthetic data for an easy and faster access for sensitive data. And, well, from my side, that's all. Feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Fabiana, thank you so much for your presentation. We will now hand over to Jaime. Thank you, Jaime.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Jaime Jorge, I'm CEO and co-founder of Codacy, and today I'm talking a little bit about DevOps, quality, and impact. I'll start with that idea, which is delivery of engineering implies company performance. In fact, best-in-class companies that are great at software delivery, that means essentially that they're twice as likely to exceed company performance goals. And that means essentially higher profitability, higher market share, and higher productivity. But that contrasts what we're seeing in the industry today. In fact, 78% of firms are still undergoing or exploring digital transformation. 31% of the industry is not using modern development practices, and there's pressure from above. So 47% of leaders face pressure from their boards to digitally transform. So key insight here is that in order to digitally transform, one must measure. We cannot change what is not measured. And so it starts really with measuring and understanding the right things with a strong focus on capability. So if we dig a little bit deeper into what that measurement means, there's bad predictors and there's strong predictors in terms of software engineering performance. Bad predictors, as a few examples, are lines of code. If we're measuring the number of lines of code that an engineering team is producing, that's not a good measurement of performance, because I could be producing 1 million lines of code and still not having impact in the business. On the other hand, velocity, as measured by story points, for example, is very different from team to team. So it's not one single metric to compare the whole organization. And last but not least, utilization. How many of my engineers are actually busy developing software? also not a great metric, mostly because that's a metric of just busyness and not of outcome. And it's also proven that as we go towards 100% utilization, the capability of a team to affect their product really reduces. So it's actually exponentially harder to deploy software. That's a contrast to strong predictors, and there's time and there's stability. Within time, you have deploy frequency, how many times you actually deploy to production. There's change lead time, the time between a customer request and that request being served into production, and then stability, mean time to recover from a failure and change failure rate. So, as an engineering leader, these are very important to have in mind. And especially these four are already proven in the literature to strongly correlate to organizational performance. Another very important and highly coupled element to this is company culture. Outcomes instead of outputs is a very important notion to have. Outcomes, business goals, ultimately that drive the innovation and impact within a company, instead of outputs, which just really makes for the company just look busy without having any idea or any sort of impact within a company. And then last but not least is impact. Instead of just rules and bureaucracy and fear and hierarchy. So within these two ideas of outcomes and impact, that's the sweet spot for driving fantastic company culture that really has an impact in engineering performance. And so I'm going to introduce a little bit to a very important movement that happens within the scope of the DevOps revolution, if you will, which is shifting quality and security left. And we do this with our platform, Codacy. Let me start by motivating what we see already in the industry. So according to the latest report from DevOps, high-performing organizations are shifting quality and security left and integrated into the continuous delivery pipeline. So instead of us thinking that there would happen essentially quality and security analysis at the release or deploy stages, we now see it happening in the code and build. It's not really new, it's part of what we're seeing already for a few years. What we're also seeing is the value of quality standardization. So if we think about a company that has many teams, in this case 3, we see that if they don't share the same best practices, code standards, code coverage, for example, the same metrics, the same criteria of developing software, it really decreases performance because it removes the same unified language between these teams so they can communicate freely. And more importantly also, for people to just collaborate and move within the company. As opposed, if we have static code analysis and we have standardization enabled, we'll have interoperability, efficiency, and a decrease in complexity. So therefore, these 3 teams are actually able to collaborate much easily. The old school way of us thinking about standardization is something that happens later in the stage of the DevOps lifecycle. So instead of us thinking about the requirements verification or even the code writing part of it, the code review even, it would happen normally in implementation and maintenance. What we believe as a company and as a product is that this is not effective, is very late in the process, and really you end up with a very different company within your own infrastructure. So very different teams, and you'll have many companies within your own company. And so within Codacy, what we provide really is a way for, within the plan, code, and build stages of your development, to have a continuous and automated standardization process by which you are able to validate whether everyone is rowing not only in the same direction, but with the same criteria. We have more than 500 customers around the whole world, and Codacy really is a pillar to many organizations worldwide to make sure that quality is the same across the whole organization and shifting left quality across the whole life cycle. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I'm happy to help in any way. Please reach out to us and be happy really to partner up with you. Thank you.
Jaime, thank you so much. Again, Vasco, we'll hand over to you, and stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandre. Hi, I'm Vasco. I'm co-founder and CEO of Unbabel. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what does it mean to build universal understanding from our perspective. One thing that we've been seeing in the world is that there is continuous change driven by many factors, but two significant waves. One of them that most of you are probably feeling. One of them is globalization. So companies are going global earlier and they have a bigger footprint in different markets. And the other is digitalization. So we're seeing a continuous amount of industries that are shifting towards digitalization. Some industries are kind of native in digitalization. You know, a company like Uber, you know, was created in the digital world. But you see banks becoming fintechs, and you see, you know, the continuation of brick and mortar stores becoming e-commerce, and this is the same for other fields. And we see this also when it comes to language. So it used to be that most online content was English that represented the international market, but now what you're seeing is that the internet isn't English anymore. That it's almost like there is a Chinese internet and a Brazilian internet and a Russian internet, and each market is actually used to operate in its own language. Now, in order for a company to be global, there has to be something that supports that effort from an infrastructure perspective. And what you see is there's a number of areas in which that has already been somewhat achieved, or at least it's fairly developed. Whether it's running your servers from a bunch of different places, or delivering it to a number of different locations, or collecting payments, or shipping products worldwide. But subjacent to a lot of the different business units in your organization is language. And specifically, the ability to operate in multiple markets from a language-independent perspective. We see nowadays companies have massive issues, whether it is how do I promote my products and get customers to understand what I do, whether it is to actually convert prospective customers to current customers, or supporting the customers that we have. And so what we see as the inevitable future is that there's going to be this thing that we're calling the world's translation layer that is going to be plugged in everywhere, and is going to enable companies to deal with these issues in a seamless manner. And so that's what Unbabel does. Now, thinking of the world's translation layer is quite a big task, and so we started by focusing on one of the problems, which is how do I support my current customers when they're spread around the globe, and I have to deal with a number of different languages. And when I think about this, we right now focus on specifically tickets, so emails, chat, and FAQs. Now, to give you a rough sense of how the process works is, you know, we take, and why are we different from just having a translation agency do this, is we combine artificial intelligence with human intelligence. And so when you have a text coming in, we first have a layer of data anonymization, which is something that we see as a particularly relevant point for this audience and for the enterprise and the intelligent enterprise in general. And then we have our own custom-adapted machine translation engine that typically learns with every human parsed data that we have, and that over time really learns the expressions and the tone of each individual brand. And then after that, we have a proprietary quality estimation module that does a real-time determination on whether the output of the machine translation is good enough, or if it needs to be further translated by a human. In that case, it gets sent to our translator community, and at that point, it's sent back. Now, this obviously is a very 10,000 feet view of the workflow, but it provides an incredibly scalable, high-quality pipeline for a number of different use cases and languages. In this case, as I said, focused on customer service. Now, it's important to note that there is, on top of this, a set of metadata annotations that then get reused to retrain all the VI components, thus completing the feedback cycle. And then this is exposed through an API into the integrations that agents actually use. So whether it is Zendesk or Salesforce, or whether it's Dynamics, the experience from the agents is native. Now, we think of customer service as this wedge into the enterprise because it's kind of the most obvious use case where we can make an immediate impact. And this is also, it's really relevant because what we see is we used to live in a world of voice, but non-voice is really growing customer service, especially as companies move towards digitalization and globalized state. So, if you ever try to call Airbnb or Uber, is much harder than a kind of an old-style industry. And so this is playing in our favor. And especially because what this enables us to do is deploy our solution as a multilingual customer support with this hybrid approach. So combining artificial intelligence with humans that come from the gig economy. We have a number of different enterprises using us, primarily focused right now US and EMEA, and typically B2C companies that are either worth $1 billion or have more than $1 billion in revenue, that is, have the scale of operations in which our impact is super straightforward. And one example of this, so a lot of times I really try to explain like the simple reason why our customers use this. Well, because what they see is ultimately a better way to serve their customers. They see an increase in customer satisfaction and a lowering of the first response time, which is two of the fundamental variables and KPIs of the customer service. So it's what Unbabel is doing here is really solving the language issue, and the impact of that is a better service to customers. One example of Microsoft, for example, as a customer, is the ability to innovate global customer support. What I mean by this is, Microsoft, with thousands and thousands of agents distributed globally, is able to take Unbabel and vastly optimize the way they interact with customers on their B2C products, and with that see the same things that we see across our customers, which is increasing CSAT and a very strong reduction in costs of serving those customers. So a better service for a lot less money. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions, and if I can help in any way, please let me know.
Vasco, thank you so much for your presentation. We will, after listening to all three presentations, I think we'll open the discussion with our panel. First, I would like to maybe start with you, Vasco. Just following up on your presentation and listening to the footprint and scale of your coverage as a business. What would be the typical enterprise profile and scale of your ideal customer, or of those customers who, from an organizational standpoint, more quickly adopt Unbabel's technology?
So for us, in terms of ideal customer profile, typically sits at enterprise level and B2C companies or B2B2C that have transactional value. So the transactions with their customers are typically paid. So it's worth for them providing a level of customer service that that is fairly high. The bigger the company, the more impact we have, because the immediate impact is a reduction in costs and an increase in CSAT, et cetera, but the reduction in cost means an impact on the bottom line. And then we focus on 4 verticals right now. So travel, e-commerce, gaming, and fintech. And tech. So some of our biggest customers, Microsoft and Logitech, and are in the tech space. And I think that there's a correlation of the ability to implement Unbabel with how far along they are in their globalization and digitalization scale. So if we look at Microsoft, Logitech, or other companies like that, they're already very digital, so it's easy to adapt the processes. And then if you take the same level of company in this process, sometimes it means more change management in the way they do processes, in the way they serve their customer. But that's roughly the IDC.
Okay. Jaime, in the case of Codacy, what would be the sort of the enterprise-grade typical customer that is applying your technology to streamline development operations?
In the case of Codacy, what we see normally is an organization that reaches, let's say, 100 developers and starts scaling, we'll start to face a few challenges. As I mentioned, in the case of standardization of quality is very real for companies that have thousands and thousands of developers. So it's a problem that scales as a company scales as well in terms of number of developers, as in the same case of Unbabel. And so it tends to be a software delivery, a software industry company that will have to produce software and has hundreds and hundreds of developers that uses modern practices or wants to adopt modern development tools and wants to invest in having a competitive edge in that process. So those are typically the best profiles to use our product.
Okay. Fabiana, now back to you. Well, you've shared with us what your solution actually offers as a value proposition. Obviously, as a company, you're still as a rising star, an earlier stage company. So instead of sort of diving deeper into your customer base, I would probably challenge you to share a little bit more with us and elaborate on the typical use cases that you think your solution is better prepared for in the enterprise environment.
Yes, sure, makes sense. So in terms of solutions, as a data-centric or data-centric platform for data science development, we consider our solution to be horizontal. But we can play with a role whenever there are companies that are looking into invest or are already investing into development of AI solutions and want to get better results and implement best practices, for example. So to give you an industry example, for example, retail, it is very common to see use cases such as building recommendation systems, as I mentioned, and in these cases, retail is highly impacted by the quality of the data that comes into their models. So with the use of Ydata's platform, it's not only possible to build this recommendation systems from an end-to-end perspective, so from the development of the model to its delivery into production, but also to get 2 times the ROI expected from that solution because you have done it with better data. On the side of healthcare, that's another sector that could benefit a lot from a solution like Ydata, and we feel it's a sector that could definitely benefit a lot from the disruption of AI. We are talking about an industry and a vertical with a lot of sensitive data, because in the end, it uses a lot of patient information. And due to that fact, it's very hard usually to get all the data that you need in order to get good models and good predictions. Talking a bit more specific, for example, for cases like Alzheimer's, you could benefit a lot from the use of precision medicine. But with Ydata, this is possible because we have a module that enables us to generate new data that is private by design and compliant with GDPR, but perfect for AI development, for example.
Well, that's obviously very, very interesting, and actually, if you allow me to dive slightly deeper, when you look at your more direct competitors, and if you look at the landscape in that space where you operate as Ydata, what would you say vis-a-vis your typical enterprise-grade customer is that sort of that trigger, that unique selling point that really makes a difference when you compare yourselves to your more direct competitors out there?
Yeah, sure. I think on that side, definitely our data-centric approach. The majority of our competitors, if we see the landscape of AI development platforms, they are focused either on the end of the process, meaning the delivery of the models, or in the process of developing them with tools. But we are focused on the beginning of the process. So the data. And in the end, it will be the data that will dictate the value that a company can take out of AI. So if you want to be successful and have the return of investment that you expect while adopting AI, you should first take care of your data quality and only afterwards start worrying about building the models.
Great. In your case, Jaime, what does really make a difference for the CIOs in the audience to actually opt for Codacy vis-a-vis your more direct competitors?
Well, we see a number of things. Integration, so actionability is very important because we try to be a platform that does not tell you only that you could be better. We try to also be actionable in the insights that we provide to our customers because we found over time, and it's a learning point, that unless there's actionable insights that you can make something about it, people just won't see a report like that. So that's very important, and we try to be better than our competitors in that way. We also provide a seamless experience in the integrations that we provide, whether they use GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, we are there. So embedded in the workflow, which is very important. At the end of the day, we win when we have the whole engineering team using our product. So facilitating that process is very important. I think we have an edge there. And lastly, I think we're very good at the 0 to 1 in code analysis. I think most likely best in class here. So we want to set up a tool, we want to set up a process, you want to get static analysis running within your organization. You go to Codacy and we have almost everything ready for you to set up very quickly. And I think that's a really good job that we've done.
In your case, Vasco, I mean, you're tackling a multi-billion-dollar problem and opportunity in the market, and the way you're sort of bringing new customers on boards on a regular basis. I mean, how are you making that happen as a company when there's a traditional industry out there for translation services?
Well, I think in a way the sub part of the market that we're focused on is in a way we're creating that. So until now, the concept of doing customer service through a layer of translation, especially the communication piece of it, is just something that wouldn't happen. And so what we see in our deals, the competition is really doing nothing, right? It's just a status quo. It's just hiring people that speak the language. Now, traditionally that hasn't happened because it really requires a combination of the speed of AI with the quality of humans. And so this hybrid approach wasn't really possible until a few years ago. And so there was an opportunity there. Now, for us, for example, I think that it's finding the companies that are feeling the pain. We focus on ABM, so we can identify the set of companies that we think are a good fit based on a number of criteria, and kind of focus on, there's a bit of an educational part of like, hey, let me tell you about a different solution of what you can do. And the trigger points for us typically tend to see either companies that are serving markets that are very expensive to serve. So, if you need to have a team of German speakers, that tends to be very expensive. And so instead of doing that, you can nearshore to something like Poland, or you can offshore to something like, India, and suddenly you can serve that market from a customer service perspective in a much more affordable way. So that's, German, Japanese, Northern European languages where it's typically really hard to find speakers. For a Spanish language, it's much easier to find South American customer service agents. And so in essence, what we're enabling is almost until now, if you wanted to offshore customer service, you can really only do it in English and Spanish because that's where you find the required populations. But now you can offshore any language. So that typically large companies, hit this problem once they reach a certain size of their customer service force, and that becomes really hard to manage because hiring constantly native speakers, the turnaround, the turnover is pretty high, and it's not typically the kind of job that is a career for most people, so it's also temporary. I think every time you're creating a market, there is a significant effort in turning the crank and kind of getting your message out there, and really fine-tuning and understanding what are the companies where there's a resonance, right? A lot of times you'll talk to some a CIO in a company, and it's not that they don't want to do it. They can see it. They can see how this is amazing, but the company just isn't ready, right? The change management requirements, like, well, I already, my model is already by having 50 teams across the world, and so I would have to change the way we think about this, and then not have these people over here and have them over there, and it's not the right timing. So it has to be a bit of the right combination and the nurture of the lead and kind of the information, so that when the company's ready, we're there to help on that change. Some companies are already, like for example, for us, the current status in COVID, what we saw in some areas was an added urgency, which is something we weren't seeing before. I think before what we're seeing is this is a new way of doing things, and suddenly with customer service centers shutting down during COVID, we had customers coming to us and say, hey, we don't have any solution for Italian, right? So can you help us with that? And there was much more of an urgency of just solving the problem. And so we've been seeing a lot that the idea that COVID in a way accelerated digital transformation by 10 years, that's definitely true for us, for what we're seeing in our market.
I think bringing that subject to the discussion, we can't really work around that. We are listening to all three presentations. We're talking about companies and teams and organizations which are by design since inception sort of ready to continue scaling and be let's say, more resilient to volatilities arising from situations like the one we're living globally during this year. So what we're witnessing across companies like yours are situations where from one day to another, all teams have transitioned immediately to remote status. Operations are continuing to resist to any sort of subtleties in terms of go-to-market sales processes and so forth. So what has been your experience so far, and how are you looking at the coming year based on the experience of the last few months? How are you seeing that your own experience from a cultural perspective, from an organizational perspective, is actually helping you even better deploy your technologies and your solutions together with some enterprise customers? Jaime, do you want to explore a little bit?
Sure. I mean, we took a very drastic approach to things, and we already enabled remote working within our organization. What we've done early this year, as soon as we had a sense that safety was being questioned, was go remote first. And so everyone's working from home one day to the other. I mean, given obviously we're an organization of 50 people, so that's obviously there's some flexibility there, but it was a decision quickly done. And that became then, the very next day was the biggest set of challenges that we've seen, which was how do we keep a workforce that is now completely working from home, that weren't expecting to work from home. Some people had their own kids, and they're working from living rooms and small houses. So how do you deal with that? And we try to create dynamics in which we incentivize people to get equipment for their home offices, newly created offices, and we try to create space for them to focus. We created an idea which was offline days. People didn't have to be in Slack or in Zoom all day. They can focus on what they're doing, but it's still a challenge because what we're seeing in effective terms is that people are burning out. People are burning out.
Fatigue is the real thing.
Completely. And so I think what we're seeing, and there was a really interesting quote of, I think it was last week, from Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, and he said he does not believe in remote working, and he said what he thinks the next few years we'll see is working from the office, but 1 or 2 days per week working remotely, right? I still don't know. I think working remotely has a lot of benefits if done well. And also, very important point, we're not working remotely. We're working from home because many companies have to, right? Working remotely involves you having offsites, you having culture events. We can't do that. It's so difficult. So I think it's a lot of dynamics, and we're still trying to adapt to it. Yeah.
In the case of Unbabel, has the current situation posed obvious additional challenges in working with your enterprise customers? How is sort of deployment and going through sort of procurement and POC and piloting the technology and then rolling out and scaling solutions across multiple geographies with localization teams and so on? How does that happen today? Although, I mean, you're growing and continuing to grow, so can you share a little bit of what the challenges, how have the challenges of working with the corporate world changed over the last couple of months due to this current situation?
Yeah, they've, in many ways, they actually improved. So, obviously we have a similar trajectory. I think the first 2 months, once everybody switched to working from home, the working from home wasn't an issue. We already had offices in multiple countries. People already had a lot of flexibility. Pretty much every meeting, there's always someone that is on Zoom anyway. And so that part, like most tech companies, was fine. I think in our case, what we saw, for example, travel is a big chunk of our revenue, and we were seeing, wow, this is going to take a big hit. So we needed to adapt very quickly, and that was fairly painful. It required a restructuring, a reduction in the size of the team. Those are also those rifts are always very painful. And so the first 2 months were really adapting to that and kind of trying to predict what the hell's coming, right? Because we didn't know. After that, what we're seeing since then is a bit different, right? Like the reality is actually way less worse than we thought so far. I still think that obviously there's a potential that the economy just hasn't been hit really, like there's a disconnect between the economy and reality because of furloughs and a bunch of other stuff. And if there's a second wave or there's the economy hit that we've been fearing, who knows what's going to happen. So far, what we're seeing is in the beginning, so after that, for a month and a half, I would say, it was actually it was easier to interact with customers because everyone was available. You want the VP of whatever, like before you have to book a meeting, now everyone feels like they need to be useful and productive, and so everyone's home and they're ready and there's nothing else to do. So meetings was easy, and also no one expects an in-person meeting, so suddenly you can, you don't lose time in travel, you don't have to, people don't wait until you're there to have that conversation, they have it right away. And then what we're seeing already in terms of deployment is, even though a lot of times our biggest customers are in the US, the deployment then it happens on the international offices, right? And so it was already a cross-border deployment, and which required mostly happening through online. And so that part didn't change much. It's, I think the thing that we're seeing is a bit like what Jaime was saying, is you start having a bit of Zoom fatigue. So I felt in August, before August, there was just incredible focus and productivity. As things were opening up a bit more here in Lisbon, I mean, San Francisco is different and New York is different. In Lisbon, you could see that people needed a break. And so August, I think we had more vacation than maybe we would have otherwise, but it was important for people to kind of disconnect a little bit. I still think that that's happening right now, if possible. And then now we'll see, right? Our office here, until the end of the year, you're not, in the Lisbon office, you're not required to come to the office if you don't want to, but we have space for everybody with social distancing and so on. So we're seeing a blend of people that really needed a space. I feel right now that, a little bit what you're saying, I think it feels to me that the ideal amount for now is a mix of maybe 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, or vice versa. People are really enjoying that flexibility. I do think that there is, and maybe at the risk of being a bit controversial, I think there is a significant risk that it's one thing to be stuck at home working, there's nothing else to do and you take a ton of meetings. The other is you are kind of half remote, half not, but you can also go out, go to a restaurant, go to the beach, see your friends, and do a bunch of other activities. And there is a risk that people will then concentrate, focus on, I'll actually just work 3 days a week, and the others, I kind of take emails, but it's not really productive. So how much will people be able to use the time at home to continue to be like incredibly productive? We'll see. And so we'll have to explore. We're trying a bunch of different things. We usually would have the Unbabel retreat. It was a massive event every year. Obviously this year we don't. We have to cancel a bunch of stuff like everybody else. Brave new world.
I think the startups and companies that have been sort of being born over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, if you zoom out on the timeline, you actually see a handful of companies that are now making a difference in the current environment that were born less than 10 years ago. And so it's interesting to see how the current situation, how the shorter term evolution of our times will actually impact and influence the way the newer generation of companies will continue to impact across industries, the way we do business and the way we behave in different industries. Fabiana, back to you. In the case of Ydata, you're obviously, as a next generation company, you are sort of tapping into tremendously significant opportunity or problem to be solved in the enterprise world. When we look at the next 5 to 10 year horizon in the enterprise environment, and when we talk about intelligence in the enterprise world, we can't avoid speaking about data management, next generation data management, data security, data protection, predictive models and AI models, and how data scientists can actually manipulate, process, work around data, and produce growingly so better and better results. So in the case of Ydata, you're starting to tap into that space in the market. How do you see yourselves as a company in the next 5 to 10 year period within that enterprise evolution that you expect around data acquisition, data collection, and sort of upstream in the data value chain? How do you see the role of companies such as Ydata in the future and in the capability of transformation in the enterprise world?
So we see the role of Ydata, and as you mentioned, as a sort of next generation data management. Afterwards, so far with the rise in the board of solutions like housing, we saw the rise as well of data governance, and the consciousness that data needs to be treated with ETLs and so on. And now we are seeing a new paradigm with machine learning. So we still need data processing, we still need to know what data we have, but the old fashioned and the old idea of data management does not cope with the new standards that AI and data science require. And that is Ydata's vision and the role that we are taking. We help enterprise to step into this next data generation management so they can benefit more from their data. They also know more of their data, and they can extract more value from their data so they can definitely become the leaders of tomorrow with better AI.
And from the key use cases that you've been working around with some of the corporates that are starting to engage with Ydata, what would you say are the sort of the top challenges in the sort of startup corporate relationship, and how can we together, both the enterprise world and the startups that are making a difference and which will mark the future of your industry, how can you sort of optimize that engagement and that process of working together to overcome those challenges and optimize for success together?
On that sense, we can help a lot of enterprises to embrace this new digital transformation through AI. We can make much easier the adoption and implementation, especially in this market where there is such a shortage of people and data scientists. And also there is such huge and massive technical debt around. So data science and Ydata's platform in that sense can help a lot enterprises to adopt it faster and better. And that is the work that we are doing with some of the enterprises that we are doing.
Great. In your case, Jaime, and given Codacy's experience, what would you say are sort of the main blockers or the key challenges in working with the typical enterprise customer? And besides COVID challenges, I mean, looking ahead, hopefully sometime soon we will overcome this horrible situation in the world. So what will continue to be the key challenges in working with corporates, and how can both sides work together to overcome those challenges?
So there's a movement that we see within the developer tools space, although developer tools is critically more important and increasingly more important within a company. And that's a movement of consolidation. So we think about, let's say, suppliers like AWS and Amazon Azure, and more and more they're accruing value, not only in platforms and more products that they will launch, but also up the chain. So we're thinking about continuous integration, source code managers like GitHub, right? So one of the reasons why Microsoft acquired GitHub. And what we're seeing is it's a movement towards that, but it's still in the early stages. So we're still, for instance, when we're deploying our software, it's very critical for us to play along with the suite of tools that the company will have. That's a critical thing for us, because companies will want to, when they acquire new technology, for that technology to be part of a larger picture, of synergies of tools. And so we believe that as time goes by, that will be easier, but we're in the early days. Right, so that's one point. We're also seeing from the field that technology is still pretty much, although we're moving towards the cloud, and everyone is already taking for granted that that's the direction, but companies are still pretty much relying on on-premise technology. And it's uncomfortable even to say this, but it's the reality. And then for us, that poses the question, like, how would we support companies that want to have quality standardization, security shifted left within their pipeline, but will want to have that IP controlled within their infrastructure? So that's a challenge, one that we've taken head on by having an on-prem technology that people can use whatever setup they want, right? You leveraging Kubernetes, for example, but it's nevertheless a challenge. I think ultimately this consolidation plus the move to cloud and all the other movements that we're seeing in DevOps will merge within the next 5 years, but we're getting there, I guess.
In your case, Vasco, can you elaborate on the challenges that you typically face when you're sort of discussing the early adoption of Unbabel as a technology in a particular industry or with your typical customer?
Sure. I think our challenges end up being a bit typical of enterprise sales, especially enterprise sales when you're trying to create a new market. It means that there's no budget yet allocated for that kind of solution, right? So you typically end up finding a champion that sees the value, right? And they have a vested interest in the result, but you still need to navigate an organization and understand how to get the buy-in and what's the right process and how do you get things to procurement and so there's, depending on the organization and the geographic location of that organization, there's a different level of complexity in any kind of sale. I think for us, that became more apparent as we moved up the chain, up the value chain. So we, in the last few years, have been migrating very rapidly towards enterprise. And so, the bigger the enterprise, the more complex is the sale. And with that comes also the expectation of white glove service and of the maturity of the CSM, of the customer success management team, or the implementation team, or the customer centricity expectation of the pilot, and so there's a required maturity of the company itself, right? So, things, for example, that maybe a mid-market company doesn't worry that much about, the security infrastructure of the solution, or the anonymization pipeline, or the InfoSec processes become much more complex, and making sure that we're covered in ISO compliance, and so it's the complexity of the sale and support of the potential customer and the existing customer becomes significantly more demanding. And I think that's, for a startup, that tends to be a challenge because you don't have that many resources. You need to appear as a mature company, and there's a bit of, until you can prove it, then you have to find people that are willing to bet on you. We're now at the stage where we have enough customers we can show it, but you still have to deal with the complexity of the organization, and that's been, being an engineer, I always feel that there should be press a button, it either works or doesn't, and human interaction is anything but deterministic, right? And so.
Yeah, great. Well, I think, thank you for the time to the three of you. We tried to sort of dive a little deeper into the discussion in your three particular areas of expertise, but what we see and our conviction is that, and it's basically ultimately our thesis, is that the future of digital transformation is heavily powered by artificial intelligence, machine learning, next generation data management, and everything, all things data related. And so the entrepreneurial engine of the economy is a crucial pillar of that transformation across industries. Hopefully during the day today, we had the opportunity to listen to a little bit based on these three companies and three examples of how a new generation of companies are actually working together with the enterprise world in not only helping enterprise acceleration around innovation and differentiation vis-a-vis their competitors, but also in the shorter and medium term accelerate gains in terms of efficiency, better quality and around management, and obviously having an impact on how the transition to digital happens across geographies. So thanks again to IDC and to everyone listening to us. Thank you, Fabiana. Thank you, Jaime, and thank you, Vasco, for joining us. Hope you liked it, and feel free to reach out to all three, Fabiana, Vasco, and Jaime, and continue the conversation offline. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.